What happens to power when it changes hands? Not through elections or inheritance alone, but also through taste. That question leads us into the conversation with Pierre Biver. In this episode, we explore how value is created, how narratives are reinforced, and how taste itself becomes political. But this is also a conversation about succession. Pierre carries one of the most influential names in modern watchmaking. His father, Jean-Claude Biver, didn't simply revive brands. He reshaped how the industry tells stories about itself. We talk with Pierre about what it means to inherit a legacy that large, where responsibility meets pressure, and how succession in horology often mirrors political succession, balancing continuity with the need for innovation. But we also turn toward the future. Independent brands, neo-vintage collecting, and digital communities are rewriting the rules of legitimacy today. Is founding an independent brand today a political act? A quiet rebellion against speed, against standardization, and mass production? And where will the next great watch stories be written? In boardroom, ateliers, families, or online networks? This is a conversation about generations, about who controls the narrative of value, and about how watches, more than ever, sit at the center of culture, capital, and power. So stay with us, because this episode captures horology in its present tense. Welcome to another episode of Watches and Politics. I am very happy to have with me Pierre Biver, who comes from a family with a high legacy in watchmaking. But what struck me most about Pierre is his vision. I'm just honored to call Pierre my friend now, and I'm really excited for what he has designed for Biver Watches in the future. And we are going to talk everything about watches, politics, legacy, the future. In my interview with Gary Getz, he explained to me why people want to enter into vintage watches. And he said something that really struck me. He said that in 50s and 60s, people had hope. So they're looking into jet flights, fast cars, airplanes. This is why they also made some amazing watches that reflected the future. Unfortunately, today, people are a little bit worried about the future, and they have this over-romanticization, or they have this nostalgia for the past. This is why they are now more prone to go into vintage watches. But this is why I connect watches and politics together, because the future, the hope is very political. However, there are some brands that shape the future. And one of them is certainly Biver Watches. And this is why I'm so excited for this interview. Pierre, thank you for accepting my invitation, and welcome to Watches and Politics.
Thank you very much. I'm, super happy to be here. Super happy to be on the podcast. As you said, I'm the one who's most fortunate to be able to call you a friend, and we've had back and forth all this time. And I'm so happy to be here. Really excited to discuss with you. And I think that, watches and politics are definitely an interesting subject. And I think you and your guests, like Gary, have been able to really pin down some really interesting points. And I'm super happy to be able to share my 2 cents of thoughts or visions for what they're worth. Not so much in my opinion, but I'll try and make it a great listen for your audience.
Thank you very much. There will be great words, and I'm looking forward. But to start things off, I always want to start with what comes to your mind when you hear watches and politics. What is the first thing or first things that come to your mind?
So if I had to answer that question with a straight answers shot right away without thinking so much, and maybe it's good to tell your audience that I'm 25 years old, so they'll think it's maybe a childish thing to think
Sure.
about, but I straight away think about the Rolex president or presidential. I think it is just a question of name association. So when I think watches and politics, this is the first that comes to mind. But then with a bit more thought and maturity in it, as a lover of vintage watches, I think about all these watches that have been made for, royal courts. I think a lot of them in the Middle East that have a, either different department of the country's, seal, or when they were offered as gifts. And I think that watches have played an important role as a vehicle for either sending messages across or bearing gifts, strengthening alliances, or being able to develop your aura to these gifts. So that's what I would think about. I have to admit, we don't think about watches necessarily as the rest of the market here in Switzerland, because we're so drowned into watches and watchmaking in the industry that we see it through a different lens. But no, yes, many things come to mind now. I think about things like Fidel Castro wearing two Rolexes, things like that. I don't know if that's the right theme, but it speaks to me when I think about watches and politics.
So, in the first series of Watches and Politics, I started with what would happen if, let's say, John Calvin did not take over Geneva or did not forbid jewelry. And would there be something like Swiss watchmaking as we know it today? But then one thing leading to another, and I identified 10 topics that were related to watches and politics, or how politics has shaped watchmaking, especially Swiss watchmaking, but also others. One of them is Swiss neutrality. As you mentioned, Swiss political neutrality was, one of the things that was able to make Swiss people focus on watchmaking and then, of course, expand the market. And another one was diplomatic gifts, or what would mean for Fidel Castro to wear two Rolexes and then wear none of them afterwards when he was more of a revolutionary spirit in the jungle. So these are all, of course, topics that are related to watches and politics. But to make another continuation or start, I wanted to ask you, what is Biver Watches? The reason why I wanted to ask you this is because I listened to a few interviews you did with others, and you defined it differently from other brands. So I want to leave it to you to make that distinction or to make that definition.
So I think first and foremost, and what really is at the heart of this project, at its conception, at its core, is this, mutual desire with my father to work together. Um, it came about in conditions where, on one side, my father took really, realized the importance of life, and that it's not we're not on this planet for forever. We are just simple human beings, and things can stop very quickly. And on my side, I was coming of age. I was in my 20s, realizing that as well, life is short, that people won't necessarily be around so long, and we had this desire to make our common passion that we had shared for a few years prior a concrete reality. And it manifested through creating this brand. And then when we had to really say, well, what are we going to do when we're going to be working on a project together, we really wanted to define what Biver will be as a philosophy. And the philosophy is to really connect to traditional, artisanal, and independent watchmaking, yet bridging it with the more industrial and, let's say, more mass market experience and knowledge that my father had after Blancpain in brands like Omega or Hublot, and to blend that in a very interesting brand that, in much respects, has all the traditional codes of traditional high-end artisanal watchmaking, is very independent in the choices we make, whether it's in design, where we want to, have a very specific aesthetic that is very inspired, of course, by the past and vintage watches we love, but that is very of today and even looking into tomorrow. Movement, architecture, movement, ideas, conception, philosophically of how we want them to work, what's important for us in terms either aesthetically or mechanically. And we wanted to bridge that with, good, service of big brands, the way, we can treat our customer, the way we work our retail network, the way we operate our production with our watchmakers and decorators in-house. So really it's that coming together of two worlds in a way that we thought didn't necessarily exist, at least not in that expression that Biver is, because at the end of the day, we are still a very traditional sort of watchmaking house and company, and we still make round watches. We use noble materials, and we have very traditional movements right now and aesthetics. We just try and twist them so that they're very much of tomorrow. And one of the things that was really important from the start was that it had to be a brand and a project that wasn't either only looking towards tomorrow or either looking towards the past, but really something that we were both, my father and I, looking for is to live in the present. And it echoes back to what Gary was saying and that you mentioned at the beginning of this interview. But I think that it's 100% true that people look into the watches they want to buy for what they want to feel, not necessarily what they're feeling today, but what they want to be feeling when they have something on the wrist. And we try to create something which is encapsulating a very contemporary, modern, state of the art. What is it that we can feel now with the Biver on the wrist?
Well, this is the reason why I wanted to leave it to you to explain that, because this makes Biver in a very interesting place where a lot of wisdom and a lot of experience from big brands, mass producing brands come together. But at the same time, you are an independent watchmaker, a company that makes very traditional watches. And is the creation of an independent brand a political act in itself, a statement against the system, speed, digitalization, mass production, and standardization then? Because you could continue just what others are doing, make mass produced watches, cheaper, of course, in terms of what you guys use and how you guys make those finishings. Because I was very lucky to visit your atelier, and the way how you treat your clients, and very interesting the way how you treat other people in the industry, because I've been in meeting some people in the industry in Switzerland in my last 2 visits there, and everybody is excited what you guys have in store. But this is a little bit non non trendy, because you could have just made some mass produced very good watches and then make it out there. So is this a political act itself?
I think to some extent, yes. And not only could we have done something very traditional, we could have done nothing at all. At that stage, my father
Sure.
was retired. I was studying, so definitely it has a political statement inside. I think that one of the great questions that the future bears is, what does independent mean today? We still use that term very much for what it meant maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago, or even in the past 6 or 7 years, but things have changed rapidly over the past few years. And I think that there's also to some extent a necessity, it's necessary to redefine what independent means today. But yes, it's a political statement, and I think one of the most sort of driving forces that we felt was this idea to be able to create our own vision. And maybe 20 years ago, of course, I would say, I would call them watchmaking legends and heroes like François Paul Journe or Richard Mille, that 20 years ago came out and really wanted to become independent. So that already existed back then, but there was still this need to be sort of conform towards broad, bigger corporation standards. And we've lived in the 80s leading up then to the 2000s, to this sort of watchmaking becoming very polarized by big groups. Um, and this has created to some extent a unification of product, prices, ideas, concepts. And I think that in the past few years, we've really seen that the market is now ready and, actually craving for differentiation and being able to have small watch manufacturers that really offer something that is unique, that is different, that also that these small houses can be live up to the choices they make and say we by choice go that in that route, this is what we want to make. And I think it's also a sign of society where clients more and more have known this phase where everybody wants sort of the same watches and for a certain status or to belong to a certain group. And now it's coming back to be trendy, to be different, to be yourself. We're living in where the individual is even having even more. I'm trying to be political so I can suit what the theme of the podcast. But I think we can really feel it in everyday life that it's a trend that people become more themselves, or at least they're encouraged to be really owning who they are, their identity. And I think it's no coincidence that independent watchmaking has become more interesting at that stage in society. And yeah, also political statement, because you don't necessarily, when you look at the big brands, and I'm a huge fan of the what they call the Holy Trinity, Patek, Vacheron, and Audemars Piguet. And for me, they all have so rich histories, and today have developed in three very different brands. And I think some of them are doing really a tremendous job today, but just generally, they have become sort of companies that you feel are very limited in the scope of how crazy or what they could put out there. And when you look especially at vintage watches from the 60s, you could see that they were taking immense risks. Or even when you look at the 40s with watches like the 1518, the most expensive, complicated watches out there that were sold during the most difficult and bleak times in Europe. So um, these things have definitely changed, and these brands becoming, reaching critical mass aren't necessarily able in the same way to satisfy the collectors. And that left a gap in the market, which we fortunately could get into and try to create a vision for the collector that likes the same things as we do, and that would like just the same little tweaks as we would like, and to try and speak to those collectors out there. And from what I'm seeing right now, and is that lots of collectors actually wanted maybe the same tweaks or the same differences of the big brands that we put in our watches, and they then enjoy our watches. I think that it's really important when you're independent to be able to create something that your audience or the people who will follow you understand straight away. They feel. I think when you're trying to explain too much at this level of artistry and these sort of watches, that you've lost. The person in front of you won't necessarily feel that connection with the product. You can talk about the image, what you're trying to build in terms of philosophically, but with the product, I'm a very big defender of this idea that you need to put the watch in somebody's hand, and if they know, they know. I hate to use this in this expression, this context, but really it's about emotions, and we've long passed the time where watches were actually of any utility. They are art now. And like with art, you need to be able to look at something and think to yourself, I love that in my living room to see it every day. Same on the wrist. I see something and I want to be able to wear it every day on the wrist.
You mentioned your father, the legend Jean-Claude Biver, but he didn't manage groups. He didn't only manage brands. He changed a whole narrative in watchmaking. And not only once, he changed that more times than we can think of. So when you look at his legacy now, today, what do you think is his most important contribution to the watch world?
So I think that really the thing that stands out most from traveling and meeting people that have either known him since the beginning of his career or that have become lovers of watches through him or the things that he's put in place, or that he's reshaped, as you rightfully said. And I think that Blancpain and that way of getting out of the quartz crisis is still one of the things that strikes people's mind the most, because it's very revolutionary. And you're better, it better than me, but I assume that revolutions or these sort of messages are the one that we the least forget about and the most are impacted by. And that was really revolutionary because it was really a time where everybody was, I don't know how to say in English, but everybody was bending towards they were falling for the use of quartz, even to the extent that the biggest houses, the biggest names out there, the biggest names in the Valley Drew were doing quartz watches. And to have a small independent that buys a brand that has been unexisting for 20 years, that just buys a name, a farm, and together with the associate that was, it was Piguet who had the Frédéric Piguet movement manufacturer, so it made sense. But to say we'll never make a quartz watch and we're going to complications, we're going to make the 6 masterpieces, etc., really is something that I feel is written in, engraved in stone in terms of my father's legacy. Now, some of the more fundamental, because that is in people's mind, but I wouldn't say that it necessarily reshaped the industry per se, because it was still a niche, and brands still kept going, and maybe it changed the trend, but you needed a trend in all brands and in all segments and in all sectors for mechanical watches to not disappear like people thought they were that in those days. But I think what really changed the market is repeatedly what he did at Omega with ambassador marketing with like James Bond, with Cindy Crawford, and that very loud marketing new style of promoting watches that really gave the tone for the next 20 years. And even until today, it's still the marketing strategy that's most used in the watch industry. And then with what he did at Hublot, for me, is even more impressive because it changed the whole product philosophy, and to some extent, even in my opinion, calibrated what we see now. Because in when he took over Hublot, he was really disruptive, created a lot of a whole new market. And some would argue that Richard Mille had started a bit before, or there was AP, things like that, and it's true. But Hublot did it in the most visual and public and the most known way that these sort of very high-tech, big shaped watches that were a bit different from the classical watches we were used to until then became trendy, became into fashion, also with the different celebrities mixing into sports, etc. I think he really, with Hublot, in my eyes, which is the eyes of a son and somebody who's passionate about watches, he really reshaped the industry at those two moments with Omega and Hublot, because it still has an impact today on some watch brands and their marketing. And one of the very unpopular opinion that I don't know if I'll have problems with sharing it, but I'll share it with you because it's just a thought. But Hublot, when he started, were engaged in a big fight with AP because of the differences in shape, etc., the similarities with the Royal Oak, and also the fact that AP was going down the line at that moment, which was that they were going for many colors on, you could think about all the different offshores, and they were going in the same direction as Hublot. And because Hublot was going there, I think that AP made a change, and most of the complications and the high-end Royal Oak stuff and the where AP is at today has really been influenced by the arrival of Hublot on the market. And AP, for me, I know it's again maybe sometimes unpopular opinion, but they have such amazing offerings. Sometimes they're a bit shadowed by some of the marketing that doesn't appeal to collectors from, I would say, our sphere as much as they appeal to other types of collectors. But still, AP has a lot of hidden gems, and many of them, I think, were a change of direction that had to be taken when Hublot was on the block. So for me, this is his most impacting legacy, because it really had a profound change to the watch industry, as where Blancpain is striking in terms of idea, but the other two are striking in terms of longevity and actually the waves they did.
You spoke about all this legacy. How does it feel to inherit all this legacy that that is monumental, that your father has built? Is it a privilege, a responsibility, a pressure, and 20 something years old, you're 25 now, it's been a few years, or all of them at once? How does it feel for you?
I feel that I was really fortunate. First of all, the opportunities that I come across in my life, like what I'm living today, you really have to sometimes we have to pause in life and realize how fortunate I am to be in the position I am today. Realistically, on paper, I have no merits to be where I'm sitting and where I'm standing and the things I can live through. And luckily, I have this mindset thanks to the education both of my parents gave me and also my siblings. Is that we are really lucky to be in these positions, and essentially, we're here because we were born in the right family at the right time. And it's true. So we have to, first of all, I have to embrace this, and it's an opportunity that doesn't come to everybody. So we have a responsibility to make the most of it, to be having those opportunities to work in the industry, to have so much exposure, to be able to access those, be able to talk to watchmakers, collectors, journalists from such an early age on, and without having to have had to prove anything. So it comes with a great sense of responsibility, of pride as well. But then the other aspect of my parents and in my father, in the public space, he really feels this way. Is he feels like an authentic man. He talks about his cheese, about the about wine. He's people know that he's somebody that's very simple, that loves Swiss culture, putting Swiss music, etc. And in reality, that's exactly how he is also in our private life, even more casual, I would say, in the private life, because he came from a very humble family in Luxembourg, and he grew up and really is somebody who's passionate. So we were always brought up with no sense of pressure on what we need to do in our life. My parents obviously, were very strict in terms of the grades and going to school and having good grades, etc. But never forced any of us into following the path of my father. And in terms of the pressure that comes with the legacy, we all, and myself specifically, understand and appreciate the pressure that comes with being so close to his legacy. But I don't feel any pressure to make my own, let's say, path that must be a continuation of his. Probably my path and who I am as a person, who I am as my vision of watchmaking differs a lot from his. And so I never see it as that I need to walk the same path as him. My responsibility is more to not diminish, not take anything away from his legacy. That would be a big shortcoming, and this would be a real fail for me if I would impact negatively his legacy. But in terms of my own or who am I'm sometimes I feel like I'm just a vehicle and having fun. And as somebody who grew up, very with a lot of, very privileged, because I grew up in Switzerland in a very, very, quite wealthy family, and having the chance of my parents give us an amazing education and open all these doors. For me, it's really about maximizing this opportunity. So I feel the pressure, but in a very strange way, which is that I just feel that we need to protect his legacy, and what will come about what I do, you know, that will be life. And if it's good, it's good. If it's as good, as long as I don't touch his legacy or impact his legacy, I'm happy.
Well, we're talking about succession in horology. So there is a transition. How much does it resemble a political succession? And in what ways it is same or different?
It's exactly the same, and it's a great analogy. We both feel that we're looking after the best interest of the group or what's concerned. So we all act in the best way we think we can for this group, or this, let's say, the company, our staff, our clients, etc. And but we have very different ways of looking at things, whether it's in terms of product strategy, whether in terms of retail, whether it's in terms of the way we want to build internally, or design aesthetics. We have completely different opinions, and sometimes they match, sometimes they're very far apart. And the idea in any transition or any succession is to be able to place compromise where it's good, where you still please what's, one party, and on the other hand, you still give way for the other party to actually be able to express and try out its programs. One of the worst situation I think to be in, whether political or even in a case of transmission, working together, or in succession, is to have this sort of neutral continuation. I think it might seem surprising coming from a Swiss guy that for your audience that doesn't know, we have a very, 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 very slow political system that works very efficiently, but that is very, very slow. We also have our neutrality and so forth. So for somebody for a Swiss guy to say that, it might be weird, but I think the most important is to find a way that everybody's kept happy, but that we can actually have forward momentum and make the change necessary to look into the future.
We've talked a lot about the past. We've talked about how Mr. Biver has restored the past, especially with Blancpain. For me personally, Blancpain is the highlight. I love Omega and the James Bond analogy, but the way how he was able to restore Blancpain and the marketing, the guerrilla marketing that he did at the beginning, they were amazing. So we're talking about restoring the past, but what do you feel your mission for the future then is? How do you want to build that future?
For us, one of the main challenges as being part of this group of small independents that produce, a very small limited quantity of watches that work at an extremely high price, is that sometimes we have the impression that by ourselves we can shape the future or actually contribute to changing things in the future. And I think to some extent we have an influence, but we need to really keep in mind that we're still a very small part of the industry compared to the huge groups and corporations and volumes that are produced um, in the industry as a whole. So for the future, I think that one of the main missions is to keep being disruptive, keep being contrarian, keep being authentic, and trying to put out there a way to see watchmaking which goes against the established industry principles. And I think that one of the things that we need is, with the help of our collectors and with the help of the whole community, is show to the bigger groups what they could change to make watchmaking more interesting, what they could bring forth, what could stimulate more demand for those brands. And I think this is how we can actually have an impact on the future, by keeping true to ourselves and keep being this independent segment. If we start looking into the future and by any way we join, we cross path and go towards what's been done in the broader industry, then we have no purpose as a group. We need to stay really firm and have our beliefs, and even during the hard times, and sometimes be strong and have a bit of courage and say, no, I'm going to hold on to our identity and who we are. And this way, maybe for the future, what the things we implement also internally within the industry, because we sometimes think about designs or decoration. You might think, but maybe I want Patek to make a complication like this with a movement that's aesthetic is like this. But you have to keep in mind that there are many things that come into making a watch. First of all, is the training of the decorators and watchmakers. It's only with a strong influence and brands like, I like to consider one of the brands that are good, that are helping in decoration is us, but with lots of other independents and colleagues of ours that are doing a fantastic job, is to promote decoration, promote hand crafts, promote this, and that schools start teaching that again. And then obviously to watchmakers and then to retailers, and re-communicate the passion and the strive to sell a great piece of kit to our retailers, that in some cases, sometimes when you've been selling watches that, not to name any, to not offend anybody, when you've had to sell watches where you've basically just had to choose from a list who you're going to sell a watch to, sometimes the sales staff also lose this approach to watchmaking, this touch they have with the client. So with independence, one of the hopes I have for the future, not as solely Biver, but as part of a larger group of independents, is to keep doing what we do so that we can influence positively the rest of the industry. Because in the end, it's a game where, or an industry where, we need the bigger groups and the bigger figureheads and the spearheads of the industry to bring in more clients to us. Because often when you think about the Biver, but other independent watches, we're maybe the last step in the process of a collector. but we need the collectors to start the first step. This is why, for instance, in the family, we're very happy about connected watches like the Apple Watch, and we don't see it as a threat at all, because it's actually quite the contrary. It's bringing in, more people that weren't used to wearing a watch now have a watch on their wrist. So I hear already comments and some of your audience saying, yeah, but it's a computer or phone on the wrist. It is, but it's already a first step to having something on a daily on your wrist, because I can say for a fact, friends that have never worn any bracelets, any swatches, any nothing, it's really hard for them to actually get into the mood or mindset of wearing something on their wrist, because you have your phone and you have time nearly everywhere, and very accurate time, by the way. So all of this, we need to, what I wish for the future and what we try to do is create an environment where we can push the broader industry to bring in more, being more original. And then specifically for Biver is we're still very young, so it's still very early to really be able to say what our vision for the future is. But we have a whole program that is centered around the core of any watchmaker, which is our products. And I want to keep being able to put out their novelties and new calibers, new complications, so that the market can, and the community can feel more and more what we're trying to create and what's our identity as a brand.
That is amazing. And from the collector's point of view, currently what everybody is asking for is the finishing, the details, the decoration. Because after all, as collectors, when you had more watches than you need, you want something that is really thought of, that is detailed, that is worked on, that has put the hours. And a lot of collector friends that I've talked, that is currently the trend or the discourse that people are speaking about. Like,
Yeah.
how is it finished? Does it have the required time of a watchmaker really finishing those parts? We were very fortunate that in these past few years, watchmaking or watch collecting has uh, double folded or triple folded. And a lot of people now know more about watches than they have known before. But with that comes, of course, more requirements from what a good watch stands.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I
Okay.
have a great political analogy for what you just said. And is that, I don't know if it's a true phenomenon, and maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like often when you have very extreme changes in political, let's say, inclination in some countries, often what happens is right behind you have a very strong inclination towards the polar opposite. And I think that actually that's what's happened with finishing. I'm not going to shoot myself in the foot and say that finishing is useless, but I think that brands have gone to such length. I think the bigger corporate industry has gone to such length to cut corners in that field, that this is why you've seen this huge reshift to the polar opposite. But I do have to say that I think that in that, people are sometimes missing the point, actually, of what's important and why hand finishing is important. It's not important just to say how much time the watch has been made, hours has been put as a watchmaker, and sometimes as a decorator into finishing the movement. I think one of the points that we're missing is actually the engineering and the functionality of a watch. What makes a great watchmaker is not only the ability to finish it by hand, but to put in the same time to make the watch reliable, to make the watch strong, to make the watch sturdy, to make a movement that works well. And in this huge shift that has gone to the polar opposite, I think we're slowly going back to the center, where there's a more and more emphasis put on actually the functionality of the watches as well, and the fact that they work well. And at a certain price point, you expect a watch to be able to perform. I hate to use those scientific terms, but they're very illustrative of my point. And one thing that we try to always be careful is that we stay in mechanisms that on a very technical and engineering level, that things are really, really thought about so that you have the best on wrist and best relationship with your watch. Because we have seen and we know example of watches where you may have a great finishing, or it might be many hours into it, but if you wear the watch and it systematically has a problem, it also creates a fallout of love with the product, often with the people behind it, and that's really a tragedy. So we've seen one extreme, now we've gone to the other extreme, and now we're slowly climbing back to the middle, where I can also see that the market is being more and more attentive to this engineering and having good process, the use of good materials. um, Also that brands be able to stick to be truthful about who they are and own their truth. Often I can see today in the market and in the community is that the brands that have shortcomings are often when they try to act or communicate or behave or put out their things that is not coherent with who they are as a brand. And all of this, I think, is part of a broader correction. And I think we're slowly coming out of the other extreme and towards a more mild political governance for a while, at least.
Well, in politics, usually the middle grounds are the best ways forward. So let's see how that will play in watchmaking, which I'm a strong believer on that. But it's very interesting, of course, to hear that perspective from someone who is in the industry. However, when it comes to watches, Pierre, watches are also evaluated a lot on stories, and it's about the stories. So where do you believe are the most important stories of the future going to be written? Like boardrooms, ateliers, families, digital communities? Because we live with stories. Everything that we explain in watchmaking or watch collecting is related to stories. So the future stories, will they be written in one of these?
I think that they will be written in multiple of these. If I had to say something that for me is where I think these stories will take form, and that I can see between our the collectors, for instance, that buy our pieces, is that some collectors you would not really expect to be buying such watches. And I think if you look at certain of the very high profile collectors that have gotten into independent watchmaking in these past few years, that have become standout and very big figures of what they wear is a testimony that of greatness, etc. And that means that the watches are great, have come from people that we wouldn't have expected to like these type of things. And I think if you walk into a restaurant and you're with your wife, you're with friends, you're not at all in a watch related environment, and you walk and on your way to the bathroom, the most random of things, you look at a table of some very elegant people that inspire you or whatever, and you see on their wrist a watch that actually you as a passionate and aficionado really love, and you think to yourself, how can he be wearing this? I can't believe that I've seen one in the wild. I think that those are the stories that will impact the most, and stories will be written about where we expect them least to come from. And I can see it definitely as a brand, and looking at the list of clients, etc. We're having more and more very unexpected collectors buy these watches and profiles that are very inspiring. And I think that once collectors will have those interaction with those type of profiles, those are where the stories will be written, and it will be very human stories that will be written about watches. I think that we can all say that yes, today it seems that the obvious answer is digital communities, etc. But I think that we're arriving slowly and slowly to an era where we've reached a sort of limit in terms of the expansion and growth of digital communities, and we have to recenter on the human, especially after things like the COVID pandemic that have put us in such an extreme that, again, similarly, we have to correct a bit and come back to a more mild position.
So the power is going to the hands of collectors from the digital media hype. The power is given back to the collectors then.
I think so. I hope also. The truth is that collectors, compared to digital communities and sometimes media outlets, they resonate different. If you go on Instagram, you can see many comments about many watches that have sometimes good points, sometimes the points that are not as valid. But ultimately, you see a lot. There's this constant information, constant opinions, etc. And then you go to see collectors that actually enjoy, that have experienced the watches, or just people that are just looking into wanting to buy some of these watches, and they have a completely different story. They see things through a different eye, and I think that's really healthy for the watch industry.
So when you design a watch, uh, are you thinking of the collector? Are you thinking them as clients? Or are you thinking of a museum? Or are you thinking from a future historian perspective that wants to write something about those watches? Who is in your mind when you design a watch?
I'm so honestly, myself often,
Okay.
but myself with a lot of because I think that you cannot really design when to think about other people. But I think what I try to focus on is emotions in terms of design, and what these emotions can tell about a certain period in time, about when we put the watches out, also in the broader context of the story of our company. I sometimes think of really designs that I really love, but I don't necessarily want to put them out because I think it's too early, or it's too late maybe to put some of these things out. I think that you need in terms of design, you also need to look at your environment and how you grow, and when things are the right time and when things aren't the right time. And then I try to be just influenced by emotions and trying to create something that's very us, that's very true to ourselves. Because in the end of the day, this is the only way we can succeed as an independent, is to put out there an authentic vision that clients may share or may not share. That's then dealt in fate, which unfortunately none of us yet can have a huge impact. But if fate goes well and what we do is appreciated, things will go well. And this is why we really need to focus on doing something that is really us, not looking elsewhere, not looking up, down, left, right, what the neighbor is doing, but really trying to be ourselves, what we think will be expected of us, what we think is a good watch, what we think is a good design, what sort of designs we would like. So, for instance, recently we have had a very colorful release with a bunch of different stones, also gem setting, also some more classical dials like a Clou de Paris, guilloche with the blue dial and the two-tone sort of sandblasted dial. And when I look at this collection, one thing that I see is that all these colors of stone, firstly, it's really to make a bold statement, which is that stone dials are being used throughout the industry now on all segments of prices, but you'll always see the same stones, whether it's malachite, onyx, mother of pearl, which are great stones and we also use as well. But we wanted to make a statement that you can actually still be innovative, still be contrarian using stones, and that they've not just faded into the regular industrial, and that they're not just old news now, but that they can still be interesting. Today, the future or even the present sometimes is a bit bleak. We don't know where we're going. Sometimes we can't really see what's going to happen, how's the world's going to be in even 3 years from now, 2 years, a year, even 6 months. We can't really know. And that's why we want some color. We want some fun. We want to be able something to wear watches that we feel as is empowering us. Sometimes, we feel a bit down. Sometimes we feel happy, but we need something that we put on the wrist and that matches our aspirations or our emotions. So I try to think about these sort of things. How would this watch make me feel? And when I used to work in vintage watches, I always used to say, you should buy something that puts you in another setting. I always use the example of a full yellow gold Royal Oak perpetual calendar. When you're wearing this, you should really be thinking about being in a Neapolitan suit in a very nice red vintage Italian car on the Amalfi Coast, having a very nice, very authentic bowl of spaghetti in a very nice hotel with a great glass of wine like this. Even if you're in Canada or in the north of Switzerland, it's freezing outside. You just look at your watch and you're automatically transported there. And I think this sort of working on this perception, this what really makes a great watch. You can take the opposite example, which is a Richard Mille. I'm a big fan of Richard Mille. Again, some will say unpopular opinion, but I love what they do, but when I see one or when I've had the chance to just try even one on the wrist, I think to myself like, wow, this is how it must feel to be Bruce Wayne or Iron Man, or to be, some tech mogul that's really into the like newest technology, dealing with crazy AI stuff and things like that.
Walk me through the launches that you made them, so I can make sense. Um, you launched this incredible watch that has an incredible carillon sound as a minute repeater. So, how did you come about saying that this is the right watch to launch? Is it something that you would be like, okay, I would want to wear this watch right now, or
So this is very much of a more of my father's watch. Launches will take time before the transition is complete.
okay?
So I cannot take so much credit for this because it was really more my father's intuition, and more than being a watch that this one we necessarily wanted to have on the wrist, it was maybe a tour de force, as we say in French, which is that, you know unfortunately, at this time, and I'll speak really honestly now, and what will happen will happen. If people will judge me favorably or not, that is in the hands of fate again. But I think that coming out with our own brand, anyways, there was no way to win or no good way out of it. If Biver would have produced a very cheap 50 Swiss franc watch, or 100 Swiss franc watch, people would have said that it's too easy for him because he has the name and the contacts industrial to produce that. If we would have launched something in the mid range, it would be the same story. And if we launch something high end, it would be that he's not a watchmaker, he doesn't have the credibility, and so on. So, we knew that we had a quite massive target on our backs, and that it wasn't going to be an easy launch, and that things would need a bit of time because we know how the industry is, we know how the community is. But we said, let's take it let's do the Everest, but the North Face, that is the hardest one, and all this. And we said, the first piece we're going to do something that's very complicated, very big, that's a bold statement, and that will also set the tempo for what Biver is to become, internally and externally, because we often see about the marketing and what this brings, and what this communicates about the brand and so on. That all of us either remember or can imagine when you're releasing as a non-watchmaker, independent, starting off after 50 years working in the industry, such a watch. We all know what can be in people's mind, um, but there's also something internally, which is that we need to build a team that's capable of working at that level, because what we're gonna attempt after that watch is very much the conception, the birth. Today I love the watch, and it's full of already nostalgia because it's the beginnings. But in essence, many of the thing of the what Biver is going to become in the future are changed from that first watch. That's, it's the blank canvas, and then from there we make adjustments already on the automatic. We can feel that there is some things that today, with hindsight, we could have said, oh, that would have been great on the minute repeater as well. But just generally, it was this sort of, we have to jump in the water, do something now, and build a team that's capable of working at this level, because the rest won't be easier. Quite the contrary, things will get more complicated because we're going to be developing more and more internal, calibers. We want more and more complications. We want also to mix complications together. I mean, there's a whole sort of program, but this was the launch of the minute repeater, and it had a great impact because it managed to create a certain small group of collectors around us. Small group because of its price, and also because we didn't produce so much of them. So it created a solid base on which we could also share, have feedback, develop our retailer network, develop our marketing, and it drove a lot of it helped us to motivate super good watchmakers to work with us because we're working on minute repeaters, etc. So it fulfilled its role, and it was very much a piece that we knew would be in 20 years a collector's. I hope a collector's piece, because it has all the good things and the bad things of your first watch. And in 20 years, I hope it will be recognized for this. And then the automatic, which this time we launched about a year and a half, a bit less than a year and a half ago, which is a caliber developed 100% from scratch. So it was done with the help of movement manufacturer Dubois Desprats, which is a big powerhouse. And the reason why we collaborated with them is because of their capabilities in terms of R&D and specifically in their lab research. Because one of the most expensive thing is to go through lab tests with specific equipment so that you can test your engineering and the way that the movement functions. And we both because we have two great engineers here working internally. They together with Dubois Desprats created this caliber, the JCB003 from scratch, and then we built the watch around, which already gives hints to something that is more Biver of what is going to be the future. It's a 39 millimeter case, relatively thin at 10 millimeters. It has some more traditional dials with either gold, enamel, or guilloche. Obviously, we still have the stone, which is very close to our hearts, but we started expanding more on the different sort of crafts that are more traditional and that will be more present in the future. And slowly, we will, on this base, build perpetual calendars, chronographs, maybe some, sort of GMT or world time functions, maybe sonnerie au passage. And in the next years, you'll also see, and I'm hinting and teasing it there, but also the opening of a second line within the Biver family that will have its own specificities. But the idea is that the Carillon Tourbillon is this first central launch that is sort of a standalone. And then some principles are used, but not all, and some things are brought to the next generation. And then the automatic is sort of a second launch, which is a more ground establishing launch. The minute repeater, it's an oddity even as a launch. It's a pre-launch, and then you have the automatic, which is the real launch that will then be that will showcase what we'll do for the next years, hopefully.
Well, I'm particularly interested in something in between, and that is the watch that you guys did for the only watch. I like different watches. I like different philosophies. So I will not let you go without telling me about that watch a little bit.
So again, the reality of the time we're living in today, which is where information is so accessible that it becomes unaccessible by its quantity and how much it's around us. This idea is really not a very original one. And, we all like to take credit for doing something cool. And we had a lot of success with that piece. And, we even made special orders for clients based on that mechanism, which you only have the hand in the case back. But realistically, it's not a very bright idea because this is the essence of the minute repeater. This was the reason why it was invented. It was invented when you couldn't see the dial. And we used this, we made it a bit of a pun out of it and saying, well, this is the essence of the complication. Let's use the space we have on the dial, and not necessarily the space in terms of diameter, but the width, because obviously hands take a lot of depth. Let's try and make more artistry pieces where we can do enameling, we can do hand engraving, we can do gem setting, we can really have fun and make something that's very unique, and that not only is unique in terms of the dial that we'll have, but also unique in its function. And any collector or the collectors that own these pieces always tell us, of course, the dials and sometimes the case engraving and things like that impress. But what impresses people is to have a dial with a watch without hands. And but this is not a concept that we can take credit for because it was the essence of the minute repeater. And we thought, if we're going to do something unique, let's just go the full way. And what is time anyway? And specifically for the piece that you mentioned, which we named Catharsis, it was the idea and the conception behind came from an artist that we were talking with, and in a very artistic and philosophical way was telling us about how time actually has this grasp on us. We are sort of victims of time, of time. Even the fact that we are alive and we are matter is because there's a decay that's related to time, and all this super deep sort of gloom and doom. We are condemned to die. We start dying the day we're born, and so on. Philosophy. Well, with this, you actually pivot it in the way which is we own time. We decide when we chime it, and time is not imposed on us. We don't see the hands, so it's not like time is making it's not gripping us, we're gripping time. And in addition to having moon and the sea, which is natural elements that have stayed billions of years and will stay billions of years, there's this intemporality. So the whole Catharsis project was built upon philosophical concept of extracting ourselves from time, but also playing with elements that are timeless and trying to, again, as my father say, become eternal, or at least have our go at creating something that has an eternal message. I have another political analogy that you'll like, but over the past 50 years since the Second World War, we've had in Europe, many changes in the political parties and the political landscape in Europe. But overall, there's a feeling, maybe I'm wrong, but that we just keep circling back now to the same concepts.
Mhm.
And there's not much innovation out there. And I think to some extent, this is also a reality we need to think about in terms of watchmaking.
Well, yeah.
What what is really left to innovate? Of course, we can make the thinnest watches, the lightest watches, the longest lasting watches, but fundamental innovation, we've actually not known so much in the past 10 years in watchmaking. And again, are we bound to be an innovative industry going forwards because brands keep looking after innovation, innovation, innovation? But what about if innovation is not at the core of our business anymore, and that we have to learn that we're not a commodities business anymore that makes something that needs innovation, but that we've actually fallen into the world of art. And in art, 20 years ago, maybe somebody was painting on super amazing acrylic or new types of technologies, and then they go back to painting with oil, and then they go to sculptor, and then they come back to painting with oil. And sometimes, and I think this is also one of the indicators that the industry is shifting even in terms of its essence. This whole independence wave, I think, shows that there's a need to go back to basics amongst a lot of innovation. And I think this shows that today, and this is maybe why Catharsis had such an impact, for instance, on you, is that the watch industry are not bound anymore to be innovative. They're bound to be artistic more than innovation.
So I'm safe to assume that for you, watches and watchmaking is artistic today more than scientific.
So the engineering is very scientific, but they are pieces of art, 100%. And even in terms of the way clients buy it, it's unrational completely, like art. Because I'm sure that if we would get together with some collectors and we would list a very rational way of what should we buy, what should we not buy, we'd probably all have on our list the watches that we don't buy, and the watches that we buy would be on the other column. So I think the watch industry, and specifically sort of to the collector that buys independent, I think that we have to admit that it is only about art and only about creativity and only about stories and only about emotions, because any of the technical stuff and all this, sometimes the most watches that brag about being the most technological are the ones who don't work, and the one who are the simplest are the best functioning ones. There are things like that where we have to assess that, yes, we've changed industry, and now we're in the field of making art, and we also have to change everything. We have to produce it like art, we have to sell it like art, we have to look after it like art. Like, this whole shift is in place, and I think that we will see this more and more and more apparent in the next years.
When we're talking about stories, I want you to think about this, but I don't want you to be humble. So, if a future historian were to write about your role in horology, what would you want the title of that chapter to be?
The contrariant.
The contrarian. Okay, so you want to go against the flow. That is what we're going to see.
Against the flow, and against established powers. I More than against the flow, I think I have a bit of if I'm not being humble, as you've asked me.
Please,
So
please.
please don't have a go at me for not being humble. I was asked to do this exercise this way. And I have a revolutionary spirit inside me. Sometimes I want to do things just to annoy. Sometimes I want to do things just to prove a point. And yeah, I want to be contrarian. I want to do things. And if somebody says that he doesn't get it or doesn't necessarily like it, it makes me even want to make it more obvious, exploit more these sort of things. And I would like, yeah, in 20 years, if a historian writes and I've actually had an impact, the contrarian would be a cool thing to write about, because, think about all the watchmakers you love. aren't they contrarian? The people who have impacted our lives politically in the world of sports, in the world of art, in the world of philosophy, we're all contrarian.
Yeah, that is the same thing in politics. All the biggest people in politics, they were contrarian. They wanted to look forward. Unfortunately, the bad examples are the same, but we're looking at the good
Yeah.
examples now and, taking them as role models. And then if watches are political artifacts, what is the political story of Biver name then? And what chapter are you writing right now?
Being contrarian and sort of revolutionary, you always have a tendency to sort of want to be a man of the people, right?
Hmm.
You want to be somebody that embodies frustration and the fight against frustration, the fight against established powers, the fight for a certain freedom that we don't know, a certain change of mindset. In some way, I'd love to be sort of Marx when he thought about communism in in its essential state, because obviously then life changes and things change, but I think that in its very conceptual idea and its very essence, have this sort of strong, challenging ideas that will really reshape things and reshape the landscape. And myself personally, just be a vehicle of those ideas, and really keep true and keep, have some values and honesty and transparency, and be ourselves in a very authentic and strong way, and keep on our 2 feet, keep standing tall, and say, look, we really think this is the way, and continue going for it.
That's amazing. And actually, Pierre, the Biver name, it is very revolutionary. From Blancpain to all other chapters that your father has written. And maybe we can say that revolutionary, independence, sovereignty, liberty is also what fits in what you want to build, according to what I understand from this conversation.
Mhm.
But I cannot let you go without also sharing something very interesting. That I was talking to some collectors the other day, and a lot of brands, when we talk to them, they speak about, oh, we do this, we do that, we do this in house, we do this in house. But nobody mentions about the suppliers, the collaborators, and somebody that also from digital media, but that also came to visit you. And it was like, I was shocked how they were like, hey, you came to visit us. Do you want to visit also some of our suppliers? And then you here are openly speaking about your collaboration with the manufacturer for the movements, which is
Mhm.
amazing because this is also that revolution or independence, but also collaboration with others is coming to be. And I just wanted to tell you this, that it is not going unnoticed. People
Thank you.
are noticing this. As a final question, I always like to finish with something. I think this has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. And I hope I was not too pushy, especially when it came to politics.
No, no, not at all.
But what is a collector and what is a watch collector for you?
Somebody who's a collector for me is somebody who, whatever he collects, is somebody that puts intention in what they're going to collect, what they're going to buy in, or not necessarily buy, but develop, learn, teach, study, search. Being a collector is putting your full intention, mind, body, focus on one thing, and trying to really separate. When I think about collector, I think about it's like trying to separate yourself from yourself and being just focused in the moment on one thing. And this is also why collectors, sometimes you can change focus, and you can't always stay in the same because you need evolution. So for me, a collector is somebody that has this ability and this capacity to put intention and focus into one specific thing at a certain time. And then a watch collector for me is somebody who does that with the particularity of loving watches. And then within that, there's so many subcategories of watch collectors, because the way you collect, again, putting intention and focus with the love of watches can be intention and focus in many things. It can be in one simple watch that means the world to you. It can be on making a collection of all the steel pieces made in the 60s, all the steel chronographs, all the independent watches, or the early Journe, or this, or this, or that. Then there are myriads of subcategories, but ultimately what brings us all together is this capacity to focus, put intention into one thing, which is watches, and then have our specific psychotic breakdown in terms of what we want. And when we manage this is then to be able to talk about and live this passion through these objects.
Well, thank you very much, Pierre, and thank you very much for this conversation. I know I
No,
went
thank you.
overboard with time, but I really enjoyed it. I appreciate it, my friend.
Thank you. A good conversation has no expiry time.
Thank you so much.